It's War Dragon time! RPW here with another video to the Beginner's Guide to War Dragon series. In today's video, we're going to be talking about officers. Now, first of all, how do you become an officer? Well, you're going to have to be promoted into an officer position by either the leader or by a fellow officer. Now, a fellow officer cannot demote another officer, but a leader can. Now, how do you become an officer and what do you do when you get there? Well, most of the time, an officer is going to be chosen by the leadership as being dubbed a trustworthy player. So if you've been with that team and you're growing and you're helping others on your team, you will likely be noticed by your leadership. But what happens when you become an officer? Well, I like to use officer roles within my team to make things a lot smoother and easier on all the rest of the officers and myself as the leader. Now, I don't know how common the practice is of giving specific roles to officers within other teams, but this is what we practice, and I think that this is a great way for other people to practice as well. Now, let's kind of go over some ideas that you can use for your team as roles for your officers. Now, you'll be able to kind of pay attention to your player and see what they deem is most important and what you're noticing that they bring to the table. But one of the things would be a war officer. This is going to be an officer that you feel is going to be able to seek out wars for your team that you will win, and that will do it in a proper way. They're also going to be great for leading the team within a war. So if you do waves, for example, they might be that officer. I'm not talking a war-obsessed player. War-obsessed players can be detrimental to a team as an officer because you don't want to wear your team down with a bunch of wars. You're going to want someone who's going to be able to be strategic in the way and the time frames that they set these wars. So that is what you would want to choose when it comes to choosing your war officer. Now, another one would be the PvP officer. Now, with minor events, there's not a lot of strategy put into the game. But with the PvP, there is always going to be a strategy. So in some PvPs, for example, you can actually put targets on teams, you can put team plans within the game itself, the event itself, and you can kind of put up a strategy as to what you can do to win that round. So what I suggest is you have an officer that is your PvP officer that can lead the team within a strategy. So when you choose this player, it's not going to be the one who puts all the points up on the board in the beginning or the one that's all about the highest amount of points. It's going to be the player that strategically attacks and spreads their resources out so that they can beat another player, and they're really thinking about the team points versus their personal points. Now, you can decide what the strategy is going to be or what exactly the PvP officer does, but an example of this is choosing who the team needs to be working on, which island within the gauntlet they should be working on, and sending this out regularly through messages so that the entire team is aware of who they are trying to attack. And this is going to give you a much better strategy within your PvP. Now, I personally communicate with my team weekly through a newsletter, but a communications officer would be a great officer to have within your team. Not only could they send out things like newsletters, but they can also be the one that sends out little, messages here and there about anything that might be going on within the team, or to kind of clarify any questions for the team, etc. So that would be a great officer to have to kind of take down the load off of the leader. They wouldn't necessarily be messaging out during wars because that would be the job of the war officer or of PvPs, but they can be the one that kind of encourages people. For example, if somebody hasn't done a war or they haven't put any points on the board in an event, then this would be the time when the communications officer comes in and emails them and is like, hey, what's going on? And kind of let the leader know, hey, this guy is not responding or whatever. So they're going to be your main communicator of your team. Okay, so another one is a time zone officer. This is one I just kind of thought of the other day and I'm actually planning to implement on my team. But we can't always be watching out for our team because sometimes we have to sleep. This officer would be someone that you entrust to make an officer that is going to be in a different time zone than you, so that when most of your team is sleeping or half of your team is asleep, they can step in and fill the role of an officer. That means that they can help guide other members within their time zone, or people that only get on late at night within the event or a war. And then they can actively recruit within the LC when it comes to more players within their realm or similar time zones of them. So I think this is a really great way to strengthen your team. That way your team has coverage 24/7. All right, the next thing I really want to discuss is the officer that would do most of your recruiting. Your recruiting officer, I think, would be extremely important, especially if you are a new team or a small team. Now, I don't mean that the recruiting officer is going to be the person that goes in and pushes automatic invites either. This is going to be someone who will actively get out on places like Facebook, the forums, or whatever, and post recruiting material for your team. They also would be great to get out in league chat and chit chat with all the other players within the league so that your team's name becomes more known. The great thing about your team being known is whenever somebody goes to leave a team, if they remember your name, oh, I remember the Royal Guardians and I remember this, so I'm going to go look them up. Then you are more likely going to get more players to join your team. So the recruiting officer really is someone that is going to get out there and be heard. When it comes to the chief officer, this is somebody you really have to trust. To me, this would be, for example, my husband. The chief officer is going to be a player that that if, for example, you need a break or you take time off, or let's say you get sick and you can't be there, they're going to be the one that steps in and fills the role of the leader. So you might even swap your leadership out with this officer during times like this. So this is somebody that you truly can trust that will give you back the leadership when it is time. They are also going to be basically second in charge, but of course, there's no bossiness or anybody really in charge because this is everyone's game. But, for example, they might be the one that decides, okay, yes, this person should be deleted or whatever. So that is another officer idea. That doesn't necessarily mean you need to have one, but it is an idea. Now, this is just a few different roles that I have thought of that could be useful on a team. Now, that doesn't mean this is the only roles you can come up with. You can get very creative and come up with many. Like, you could have an officer that is just for line, and this is somebody that goes in and out and, lets people know what's going on through the line app itself. So there are a lot of different ideas that you can come up with for your officers to have specific roles. Now, another thing I want to point out about officers is, what is your role outside of that? So what is the things that you can do if you are an officer? Now, okay, so another thing that I want to kind of go over is the actual aspects of what an officer can do within the game. So really quickly, they're going to be the ones that can, number one, recruit members on your team. For example, right here you can go in and it says, would you like to invite players? So you can click recruit. Also on this specific area, you might want to uncheck low activity because there might be a player or they might get kicked in the middle of your war and you don't want to give out free flames. But another thing they can do is they can actually promote other members on their team. They can remind players under contributions within a war and also within an event. So those little things that you can't do as a regular player is what you're going to be able to do if you have been deemed an officer. So for example, whenever you need more points for a team achievement, they can go down to teammate contributions and notify. So these are going to be the only people that could do this. Now also under the battle tab, depending on the event you're in, they're going to be able to also add some extra info in here. Like for example, they're going to be able to tag certain islands or teams in specific events. So that's just a few things they can do. I want to go over more about what an officer can do within the game menu wise in my next video, and that's because I'm going to wrap what the leader does and what the officer does within the game itself. So this is going to be the actual walkthrough of inviting people, kicking people, promoting people, etc. So make sure you check back for that, and I believe that's going to go out on Wednesday. Alright guys, well, so that's today's video. I hope this helps you understand what it is to be an officer and the different roles you can choose for your team officers, or something you could suggest out to your fellow leader right now if this isn't something you are currently doing. Now, before I let you go, if you have any experiences as an officer that you'd like to share with the fellow community here, be sure to put that in the comment section below. And maybe if you have some other ideas for officers' roles, you can also put that down there. And of course, don't be shy when it comes to your questions. Alright guys, be sure to give my video a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell so you get notifications every time a new video is posted. Happy hunting!